Welcome to Wild Side, your wild true crime podcast.
We're your hosts, who are sisters, storytellers, and truth seekers.
I'm Bailey, a therapist who is fascinated by all weird and dark human behaviors.
And I'm Chelsea, an educator here to unearth the facts behind the cases.
We cover true crime because some cases are just too dark to forget,
and others are too wild to ignore.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride.
Do it, do it, do it. Do it now. Do it good.
Oh my.
Record this.
Oh no.
Just like we should.
Oh no.
Hey you guys, happy summer. Welcome to bi-weekly episodes so Chelsea and I don't lose our stuff.
Yeah. It's good. And it's summertime. And summertime, you guys should be enjoying your vitamin D, getting outside, enjoying the summer. That's what everybody needs. Good dose of vitamin D.
That's what I need.
And bi-weekly episodes.
And bi-weekly episodes, because I am capital TIRED.
Yep.
Well, tonight's case, you guys, or today, this morning, whatever you're listening to, is a little bit more of a well-known case. You know that Chelsea and I try to stay kind of on the fringes. But I had heard this case years ago, and it has stuck with me for all of these years, quite literally. And I came across kind of like a TikTok, just a short 30-second thing of it. And I was like, dude, this chick is so badass. We have got to cover this. We have to. We just have to.
Well, I don't know. Maybe it's not that well known. I have not heard of this case.
Really?
No. This was kind of when we started reviewing it and looking over all the information about it. I don't think I do. This is the first I am hearing of this that I can recall.
Okay. Well, this is a new one for Chelsea, but this is pretty crazy, isn't it?
Oh, man. It really is. I mean, and Bailey and I have talked about some of these issues in other episodes, but I had a lot of flashbacks of things that, conversations that Bailey and I had with our parents growing up reading this.
Yeah. And we'll kind of add some of that at the end. But we're not going to do any fancy intro. We're just going to kick it straight off. We're going to take you guys a little bit to the southeast into the beautiful state of South Carolina. The year is 2002. And so it is June 24th, 2002 in West Columbia, South Carolina. So it's early afternoon and just kind of one of those lazy, cool days. And 15-year-old Kara Robinson Chamberlain is outside of a friend's house just watering plants. Back early 2000s, you're with your friends. That's what you do. Small task. And she's standing near the driveway surrounded by, the familiar neighborhood. So she doesn't have her guard up. She's just with her friends. Nothing crazy. It's during the daytime. It's in a safe residential area, familiar setting. So good old, same old kind of thing, right? And at some point during that quiet, ordinary afternoon, a car pulls into the driveway. And it looks just like any other car. It's a normal, super normal car. And inside is a man who, again, at first glance, doesn't stand out. And he doesn't, rush out of the car, doesn't do anything crazy at first. He simply walks up to the girls with the intention of asking a question. And he asks if the girls' parents are home, which now, of course, we know that that's not a super normal question for a random guy to ask. But at the time, it doesn't raise any red flags, right? And then without warning, the dude's entire demeanor and tone shifts. He pulls out a gun and presses it against Kara's neck. Okay, so you're standing outside watering your plants. This guy pulls up in the driveway, talks to you and your friend for a minute, then pulls out a gun and presses it against her neck. He then forces Kara towards the car and into the back seat, where he has already prepared a plastic storage container. And within seconds, she's forced inside. He puts the lid on it, cutting off, obviously, visibility, space, and any sort of orientation, and puts her in the car and drives off.
It's interesting because that's a awful situation, right? For anybody to be in. A young girl is, even though it was a very calm interaction, she was obviously just abducted, just put into a vehicle. She does not have any visibility. And your body is automatically going to start to panic. And Bailey's talked about this before. Like, you have a fight, you have a flight, you have a freeze, you have a fawn. But usually your senses are not very heightened during these moments. You're literally in a survival mode. But what's interesting in Kara's case is, instead of shutting down, yes, her pulse is racing and her heart is racing, her adrenaline is flooding her system. Yes, that's an unavoidable thing. But in the midst of this chaos, what is amazing is that she does not shut down. She actually chooses to start paying attention. So she decides to start listening and taking a mental tally of everything she can. So she starts listening to any sound that could give her any inkling of the speed of the car, the rhythm of the stops and the movement. She hears the radio playing and locks in to what the station is, what the songs were that was playing at the time. She starts noticing details that most people wouldn't really think to register or to take note of. She even tries to remember the scents that she is smelling. So during that time, her abductor is smoking cigarettes, and she pays attention to how often she gets a whiff, right? Like, as he's blowing the cigarette smoke out, like, she's counting how long it takes in between puffs. She memorizes the serial numbers printed inside the plastic container that she's trapped in. And it's really interesting because what is happening is she is shifting from passive fear to active processing. So when Bailey was saying that she is like a bad mama jamma, that is incredible. And especially being that she's 15 years old and able to do this, and it matters, right? Because by her counting and by her paying attention, it forces her body to slow down, and it forces her body to stay calm, and it keeps her in the present. And later, when asked about this, she would say that this was actually something that she had been taught growing up. So her parents had very explicit conversations, very intentional conversations. And they had always said, if something ever went wrong, just to pay attention, to notice everything. Because one day, you never know, like, it could happen. And by you paying attention to everything that's going around you, that could be the difference between a life or death situation. And again, it's incredible to me to think that Kara made a conscious effort to do something different. She's not just enduring what's happening, she's documenting everything in real time, right? Every single detail is being locked in place. And then what she doesn't know, like, she realizes what's going on. She realizes that she's trapped. She realizes that she's in a plastic container. She realized that the car is moving. But what she doesn't realize is who this guy actually is and how dangerous this man actually is.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing that I want to point out is I think this is not a normal reaction, right? And I don't mean normal as in it's abnormal. I mean, it doesn't fall under the bell-shaped curve of how most people would respond. And perhaps it was proactive parenting and, conversations about being abducted and that kind of thing. I was literally talking to my 4.5-year-old in the car yesterday, and I don't remember how it even came up. But we were talking about good guys and bad guys. And I said, and you never know who is a bad guy. I said, bad guys look like good guys all the time. And I said, bad guys are really, really smart and they're going to try to trick you. And I was telling her and they trick you by things that you like. Like, what are some things you like? And she was like, I like puppy dogs and I like candy. And I said, yeah, they're going to trick you and say, hey, I have this, you want to come help me with my puppy dog? And of course, this is a very long conversation over the course of 45 minutes. And we're, talking about it. And I said, so what do you do if somebody comes up? And she goes, no, you're an adult and adults don't need my help. And I'm not falling for your tricky trick puppy.
Well, and I think what's sad, Bailey, in this case is I almost think it would have given her more of an advantage if he had tried to pull something like that. And that's the stuff, we always are trying to be proactive as parents, right? And we're always talking about stranger danger and everything else. But this guy, he had become a master at recognizing patterns. And he skipped all the formalities of this, hey, you want a puppy? My mom said, I know your mom, blah, blah, blah. He just went straight for it.
I walked up to her with a gun.
Right?
And said,
and get in the car.
Yeah. And at that point, a 15-year-old says, well, I don't want him to turn and shoot my friend or whatever the case is. So back to it. While Kara is inside this container, this plastic container, trying to keep track of the left turns, the right turns, the left and then right and then left turns or what have you, trying to maintain some sense of where she's at, what she doesn't know is there is a completely separate investigation. It's like if this were a Hollywood movie and you zoom out from this car and this plastic container that this 15-year-old girl is in, and the scene changes over to, these other kind of unnamed investigators that are investigating something very similar in patterns that have been happening and popping up around her. So what we start to understand at this point is Kara's abduction is not an isolated incident, nor is it a first-time escalation. This is the part of a recurring pattern from a very dangerous individual. And so if we look back a few years earlier, the timeline starts to really show us what Kara is up against. So if we were to go back to 1996, there was a 16-year-old girl named Sofia Silva who disappeared from a residential neighborhood in Spotsylvania County in Virginia. Very similar to Kara's situation, normal area, not remote, not super dangerous. And unfortunately, her body was later found in another part of the county. And over the months and years, that case for Sofia's case went cold. And then the next year, in 1997, sisters, which I couldn't imagine losing a child horrifically like that, but both of your children, sisters Kristin and Kati Lisk, who were 12 and 15 years old at the time, were walking home from school in the same general region and completely vanished. Again, same patterns, two young girls who were taken during the day from an environment that they had walked 100 times before, should have been perfectly safe. And unfortunately, again, their bodies were eventually discovered later. And at the time, investigators just couldn't find a suspect. There were no ties to it. And all of these cases, like the Lisk sisters and Sofia Silva's case, were treated separately. And so we're saying all of this, right, is because these are kind of scattered. And even though there's like a similar MO, nobody has these pieces that have connected or crossed before at any given time in the last, several years.
When the car finally stops, the uncertainty shifts into something more defined, but not safer necessarily. So Kara is taken out of the container and brought inside an apartment. And the situation becomes what it was always intended to be, which is controlled, contained, and private. This is his space, a space that he knows, a place he's chosen, a place where he can control all of the variables. Now, Kara, she's restrained, she's isolated and cut off from any immediate chance of outside intervention. And from a survival standpoint, this truly is the most dangerous phase. Statistically, once a victim is moved to a secondary location, the risk increases significantly. And whether she can fully articulate it or not, Kara understands that. She knows that she's essentially gone out of the frying pan and into the fire, as we would say down here in the South. So the internal awareness is that this is serious and this is not something that she can passively just wait out. And again, what's so remarkable is that she doesn't lose that cognitive engagement that she had in the car. She continues to be intentional in her observations. She studies the apartment layout. She is noting where every door is, where the windows are, how the space is structured. She listens to how the predator, how he moves, how he speaks, his tone of voice, the patterns in his behavior, right? So if he was watching her, the tables have turned and now she is watching him.
The turned tables.
I mean, it really is. Like, and again, this is truly incredible to me. And when he's distracted, right? Because the best of the best, even the best of the best, are going to have moments. They're going to have chink in the armor, if you will. When his attention shifts, that's when she decides that she's got to make sure that she gets out of here, right? And it's all going to boil down to timing. It's about staying alive long enough for an opportunity to exist. And she's been watching for it. And every detail she gathers brings her closer to recognizing when that opportunity comes. And at some point during that day, another realization set in. This isn't something she's likely walking away from. She would later say she believed she was going to die. And that belief doesn't shut her down. Instead, it sharpens her focus. Because in Kara's mind, if this is how it ends, then what she does in the time she has left matters even more. And part of the strategy is incredibly intentional. She doesn't decide to fight him outright. She doesn't escalate. She doesn't do anything that would force the situation to become more dangerous too quickly. She decides to stay in control of her own thoughts, of her own actions, not because she's compliant, but because she understands that staying calm keeps her alive longer. And the longer she stays alive, the more chance she has for something to change.
I just think that this is incredibly powerful, right? Because if we look at the situation, Kara has been abducted from quite literally a front yard of a house, right? She's been thrown into a plastic box, carried up into an apartment in a house, and she's been restrained. She's been tied up. And this whole time she's sitting there thinking, yeah, I'm probably going to die. I'm probably not going to make it through this, but I'm going to fight back in a very quiet way. And that is to learn everything about this man that I can. And one of the things is the power dynamic, right? So he has this system where he has created all of the control, the total perpetrator, and she is the quintessential victim in this scenario, right? And she starts navigating this environment with like so much strategy. She doesn't escalate anything. She doesn't want to provoke him. She stays regulated and calculating. She reads him, she studies him, and she waits. She just waits for an opportunity. And I think that this is more, if you ask me like, hey, what survival instinct is taking over right now? I would say a little bit of all of them. You know what I mean? Because she is acting compliant to not ruffle the feathers, but she's not frozen either, right? She is still processing her surroundings. And at some point, now from the time that Kara is abducted at gunpoint until about this point in time, this is about 18 hours. So at some point during those 18 hours, and most of them were in the apartment, Kara's abductor made a mistake. He assumes that she is well and restrained, and she is too afraid, too disoriented, and too controlled by him to do anything that would disrupt his patterns. And he starts to let his guard down, even just a little tiny bit. And again, while this is happening, Kara is memorizing everything. She's reading addresses on mail that she can see, an appointment card on the fridge. She's learning everything about this man that she can. And then in the middle of all of his little mistakes, he makes another one. He gets comfortable enough to fall asleep.
And that is the moment that she had been waiting for. I remember growing up and playing jump rope, the kind where you had two friends on either side holding a big jump rope. And I remember watching for that moment, because it's just a split second that you can run underneath the rope, right? And
like double dutch?
Yeah, like double dutch, except it was just a single rope when I was growing up. We didn't do a double dutch. But I remember that anticipation of waiting for that perfect moment. And there were lots of good moments, but for whatever reason, you finally feel that perfect moment that you can run under the rope. And in my mind, I am hoping that that's what that moment felt like for Kara, that she finally sees that perfect moment when everything aligns and the opportunity presents itself. And Kara, being the person of action that she is, takes it. To her, there was no time to overthink. There was no space to question whether it would work or whether it wouldn't work or all the what ifs. She's still restrained in this moment, but she starts working herself free, focusing on the mechanics of it rather than the fear. Despite panic making our movements sloppy and rushed and inefficient, which I imagine there's no way that she was not in some form of panic, she decides to, again, take a deep breath, stay deliberate. She controls her behavior and her thoughts, and little by little, she works herself free from her restraints. And in that moment, she goes full force, 0 to 60. She's able to break free of her restraints and immediately shifts into overdrive, into her survival mode. And she bolts. She bolts as fast as she can. And she moves as quickly as she can possibly move. She finds an exit. She gets out of the apartment, and suddenly she is back outside and working to create as much distance between her and that nightmare of 18 hours as quickly as she possibly can, right? Because at any moment, he could realize what happened. At any moment, this opportunity could close. And she doesn't let that panic spike. Instead, she is hyper-focused on the next step and begins running to the nearest house and starts pounding on the door. Now, luckily for Kara, the door opens. And instead of dropping and, again, panicking, she rushes to communicate. And she does so clearly, directly, and urgently. She tells the people in the house exactly what happened. She gets the information out as quickly as she can and essentially kind of passes that ball or shares that burden and kind of puts it into their court. And luckily for everybody involved, the correct things happened. And before you know it, the police are contacted.
So law enforcement is called, and when they arrive, they obviously start to interview Kara. And very quickly, they're all really amazed at what this 15-year-old girl just went through for, by this point, almost a full day of horror, and amazed at that she can recall in amazing details some of the things that she experienced to help identify who this person was. First of all, she is able to describe her abductor, like his appearance, his voice, the way he spoke, the cadence of him speaking, how he carried himself. She is able to identify details about the car, the container that she was in, the serial number that she memorized, the way that her abductor transported her. And then she was even able to remember, because she caught a glimpse, the types of cigarettes that he smoked, which were Marlboro Reds. Hard to say. Then she starts referencing the radio that was playing during the drive, how she counted the turns, the left turns, the right turns, and how she tracked the movements while she was stuck inside this container. She even is able to, again, provide the serial number for the container that she was trapped inside. And so these investigators are just like, are you serious? Like, you have all of this information, and they're not used to working with that. We can just say that, right? A lot of times you just don't have those details available. And so this is where obviously everything starts to gain traction. So once law enforcement has a lot of this like really specific information, the process shifts from like we're reacting to an abduction and a recovery to like now we can start to target who this person has. So they're not just responding to an abduction, they're now working toward identifying the abductor. The details that Kara provides allows investigators to narrow things down quickly. Vehicle type, behavioral patterns, environmental cues. And when those pieces start really coming together, it becomes really clear that this, again, is not an isolated incident, that they are working with a perpetrator who has done this before, so likely a serial offender.
And as investigators begin working through the details that Kara provided, patterns start to emerge almost immediately. The description of the man, the vehicle, the behaviors all begin to align. And within a short period of time, law enforcement identifies a suspect, Richard Evonitz. And once that name enters the picture, everything expands. And that's what makes the situation so unsettling, because on the surface, nothing about Richard screamed danger. From the outside, he looked like someone who belonged inside normal society. He had a job. He served in the Navy. He had relationships. He moved through everyday life in a way that seemed functional, ordinary. I mean, completely unremarkable. But underneath the normal exterior, something else was happening. Over time, his behaviors, his tendencies, his thoughts escalated. And for some of us, there is a really thick line between fantasy and reality. For people like Richard Evonitz, that line between fantasy and reality begins to blur, and to the point that it really ultimately disappears. And the risks get bigger. The confidence builds, and eventually the offender begins to believe that the system around him, the neighborhoods, the roads, the routines, the assumptions that people make will keep not only, well, protecting him, actually. All the things that we think will protect us actually end up protecting him. By the time Kara is targeted, he's not acting like someone afraid of being caught. He's acting like someone who believes his method works, because it has. He's done it before. He's done it multiple times before. And now law enforcement is looking at a man with a whole rap sheet. And suddenly they begin connecting him to previous unsolved cases, specifically the disappearance of Sofia Silva and Kristin and Kati Lisk. These cases, like Bailey had said, remained unsolved for years. But now we had Kara. Now we have details. And now there is a final possibility that this could be a real answer to these atrocious cases. What had once been viewed as separate tragedies begins to look like part of a larger pattern involving the same type of offender. And from an investigative standpoint, this is the climax. This is the turning point. Once a suspect is identified in a case like this, especially one with potential ties to multiple homicides, the urgency increases exponentially, because this is no longer just about solving what has already happened. It's about stopping what could happen next.
You know, most of us, as most of us hear in, cases and documentaries, serial cases with serial offenders usually take years to connect, sometimes decades, because patterns being recognized, you have to do like across jurisdictions, evidence depending on the time frame, different technology, etc. But now in this specific situation, thanks to Kara's bravery and her dedication to staying calm and remembering details of her abduction, she's given investigators a very clear path to follow. Law enforcement is no longer working with this unknown variable. They now have a name, a history, and a solid direction, which is huge in an investigation. With just hours earlier, a controlled situation in Richard's favor is now an active investigation closing in on him, right? Up until this point, before Kara escaped, this man was able to operate quietly, blend into environments, avoid attention. That's completely gone. Once she escaped, once she was able to give them what they needed to help identify him, everything else follows quickly. Movements become traceable, behavior becomes scrutinized, and the system that allowed him to operate undetected now starts to break down against him. And so once Richard Evonitz is identified, things hit a new level of urgency. Law enforcement hits the ground running trying to find this guy. They start tracking his movements, following leads, narrowing down on where he could be. even though by this point, right, fast forward hours, Richard realizes that Kara had escaped. He says, "Oh shit," and he dips. He starts going on the moves. He immediately leaves South Carolina and heads south to Florida. He tries to avoid capture and turns from, controlling his environment to now he's got to escape it. But luckily for us, law enforcement is moving quickly and they're working together. Information is being shared, movement is being tracked, and the net around him is tightening. We're now facing a full-on manhunt.
Eventually, law enforcement locates him in Florida. They move in to stop him and to take him into custody because there are lots of questions, right? They're confident in who he is, and they're even more hopeful in the information that he has regarding these possible other cases. The goal is to bring him into a system where the full scope of what he's done can be uncovered and he can finally face the justice system. But alas, unfortunately, not all endings are as we hope. But as officers approach and as Richard feels more and more cornered and less in control, before he can be arrested, Richard Evonitz takes his own life. Which, I don't know, Bailey, is that okay for me to say, like, typical? Like, how typical?
It's just the most cowardly. The thing that makes me so angry, and I think a lot of you guys will agree, is it's like, you want to be a big bad guy, then be a big bad guy until the very end. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, don't bitch out now. Don't be, I mean, of course, being a predator and kidnapping little girls is cowardly. I'm not saying that that's not a cowardly thing to do, but I mean, you're going 10 toes down. So why now do you take your own life? And it's just a control thing for this situation, I think. He's like, I'm going to take all my secrets with me. Screw you guys. I'm going to go out how I want to go out and when I want to go out. And it just pisses me off.
Well, and to me, it's just, again, it's like the whole accountability thing, right? Where he's just like, forget you guys. Like, how selfish. And that's something that we see in cases like this. When control is lost completely, the final act becomes another way to maintain it, even if it's only briefly. And it's, again, it's so bittersweet. It's devastating that so much was lost on all ends with all people. But it's frustrating that more answers could not be given in this situation.
Yeah. And, by this point in time, by the time that Richard Evonitz takes his own life, you kind of have a dichotomy happening. You have a split. Some people say it's a good thing where he's dead and he can't claim other victims. Other people are, outraged, and they argue that this prevents a trial, that it prevents a full public trial of holding him accountable for his actions, which does not allow a sense of justice for victims and their families, right? Instead, there's just simply an abrupt end. And, that's something that we see in cases like this, like Chelsea was saying, when control is lost completely, it goes back to, I am going to find a way to maintain it, right? But in the end, Richard Evonitz takes his own life like a coward. But the bigger case here, the bigger picture here is when you take a step back from everything that happened, it's easy to focus on that part. But we also want to look at the impact of this case because of Kara. What Kara Robinson Chamberlain did changed the entire trajectory of an entire investigation. Her ability to stay aware, to gather information, to communicate clearly is literally what allowed law enforcement to identify Richard Evonitz, number one, to identify him quickly, number two, and to connect him to other crimes. And without that, Kara's case and Sofia's case and the Lisk sisters' case would likely still be unsolved, right? It's something to focus on.
And I feel like this case really shifts the focus to awareness and how quickly situations can change and how subtle the early moments can be, right? And I mean that in the sense of kind of what Bailey was talking about, the conversation that she had with her daughter, where it's bad guys don't always stand out. Bad guys are sometimes, well, and oftentimes they look like us, they walk like us, they talk like us, they just fit in the rhythm of life. And what stands out is that this wasn't luck. This wasn't like, oh gosh, Kara was so lucky. I can't believe she got away from this. My goodness, the stars were aligned. I mean, this girl took all of the training that she had, even if she didn't realize that it was necessarily training at the time, but she paid attention. She figured this situation out, looked for opportunities, looked for things that could be in her advantage. And that is what stands out to me, is that this wasn't luck. This was not just like, wow, I can't believe that the odds were in her favor, right? It was something that Kara made happen. That single idea of pay attention and be smart and don't panic carried her through this entire situation, from the car to the apartment to the moment she escaped, to her talking to the people in the neighborhood, knocking on the door and telling the police. I mean, all of it was so thought out and so detailed and so intentional. And it's truly a lesson for all of us.
Yeah. And the last kind of piece here is one thing that I want to add to the end that's even maybe more powerful than that is what comes after. So what happened to Kara? Okay. Well, she is a bad mama jamma. She went into work connected to law enforcement and advocacy. So she went on to be a cop and a victim advocate. Helping others to understand situations like this in a real practical way. She's a, what do you call it, Chelsea? Like a speaker. I know an advocate, but like I don't know, a speaker. That's the best way I can say it. Where she, books on things and travels and shares about her experience as a survivor. She's a mom. She's got 2 boys now. And I just think it's amazing. One of the things I'm going to list in the show notes, you guys, is like, if you want to follow Kara, you can go to her website, and that's Kara Robinson Chamberlain.com. Again, I'm going to have it in the show notes. She's got an Instagram, a TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. So she does a lot of advocacy work. She talks about her experience here, her survival. And I think it's just the coolest that she has been able to turn this around and continue fighting the good fight and helping other people.
Yeah. That's kind of reminiscing on things that we've taught our children, and thinking about Kara's parents and being how they were proactive. Bailey, one thing that and we've talked about it a lot, but one thing that I have really tried to instill in my kids, and then other kids that I've kind of worked with and been around, and I know it's kind of a silly, almost contradictory statement, but I tell my kids, you've got to learn how to panic. And what I mean by that is, again, when you're in that natural moment where your body is going to naturally panic, we've got to figure out how to panic effectively, right? Or not panic, essentially, is what I'm trying to get at. But I just call it learning how to panic. So instead of just flailing around and just losing complete control, you have to remember that you are in control. You always have that option of being in control. And it's really encouraging to see other people like Kara and to hear their story and to know that some of these little things that you hope that you're saying as a mentor or as a parent can matter and do matter. And so I hope that for anybody listening, that this story can reaffirm the fact that you can be stronger than you think you are. You can get out of situations. You can keep cool. You can work a system in your favor, and be a survivor. Now, is that specifically, surviving being abducted? Maybe it is, but it can be applicable to so many aspects and so many avenues in life. So, round of applause, standing ovation for the Karas of the world. And I'm so thankful for that forward trajectory that she's now committing to with her life.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as you guys, to kind of tie everything up, make sure to have intentional conversations with your kids, right? Or not just your kids, your nieces and nephews, your cousins, if you work with children, I think they're never too young to start the conversation. And with the caveat to that is using the correct language at their age, right? Like having them understand, like, there's bad guys and good guys and that kind of thing. Because there's no point in, like, trafficking's a big thing. Like, especially like where I live, we're at one of the big hubs on the entire United States Gulf Coast for trafficking. So I'm very, paranoid about that, very vigilant. And I have conversations with my 4.5-year-old about it. So unfortunately, that's just a part of her growing up and understanding that the world is not just unicorns and cool dinosaurs.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep those little things in your pocket. And like I said, I was today years old, hearing about this case. I don't know how I've missed this, but Bailey, thanks for bringing that kind of up to the surface for me and resurfacing it for yourself. Because again, this was, obviously, I hope you guys know that when I say this was an awesome case, I mean it in the sense of, like, there's so much to learn from it. And I'm so thankful for the positive outcomes from this case.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Well, you guys, again, as always, thanks for hanging out with us. We will see you in a couple weeks, and we appreciate you. Thanks for hanging out with us through this wild and crazy ride.
And we'll catch you on the wild side.
Bye, guys.
Later, Gators.